From our world headquarters in New York, it's Bloomberg Surveillance. This hour, we're brought to you by Fedi Infinity, and we welcome Fedi Infinity to Bloomberg Surveillance. Ivan emails in from the United Kingdom. Ken, you're going to love this. Ivan loves rugby. Thanks for listening, Ivan. And he says, would you stop with the stupid cricket talk? So even though the United Kingdom won the Ashes contest over Australia, Ivan says enough. Effective immediately, we're talking rugby.
That can't be the only person who's told you that.
No, it is not. We're with us, our guest host, Brad Hanson, joining us as well, Rick Bookstaber. A Demon of Our Own Design is the book out a bit ago. What is the demon of our own design?
Well, the demon of our own design is basically the market and the way that we've designed the market to be crisis-prone. And so the twin demons that lead the market to be crisis-prone are complexity on the one hand, which basically comes from the arms race of innovative securities, and leverage on the other.
Well, when you look at this, and I look at your recent testimony to Congress, you've got a really inflammatory idea here, which is that the large prop desks within banks should be regulated like hedge funds. Let's cut to the chase. Is that going to happen?
I think it should happen because they have the same issues that hedge funds have. They can add leverage to a market. If that market has some sort of an exogenous shock, they may be forced to liquidate alongside of the hedge funds and lead to this liquidity spiral because of it. So whether it happens or not, whether any of this regulation happens or not, remains to be seen.
Well, there was a fair amount of discussion when previously obscure parts of the credit market started blowing up that things would get a lot simpler. And is there any evidence that's actually happened, or is there a possibility it's just going to get more complicated?
Well, there's, I testified to the Agricultural Committee in June, and it may seem odd that the Agricultural Committee would have anything to do with financial markets, but that's where the CFTC has oversight, and because of the CFTC and futures, that's where swaps and derivatives are regulated. And Harkin was pretty emphatic that he wanted to see regulation this year to simplify the derivatives markets. In fact, he was staking out a position that's pretty extreme. He wanted everything to go into exchange trading. That's probably not going to happen, but I think you will see pressure towards simplified financial products, more push towards exchange trading. One of the negatives right now, though, is that there's so much focus on healthcare. And the markets are healing from the problems of 2008.
Rick, one of the questions I have on this is it doesn't look like the street really wants everything to be exchange traded, but they seem to be supportive of this common clearing operation. Yeah. That means higher margins. What does that do to the derivatives market?
Well, I think having common clearing, having clearing corporation gets you part of the way there. Because one of the problems right now is you have this web of counterparty risks, and if some node fails, you don't even know how that propagates out. If you have common clearing, there's less risk of a propagation of a failure, and everything is more transparent in that way. But it's a pretty good place to stop if you're a financial firm, because what you've done is in a way reinforce your oligopoly position. Because if you can, fence out who can be part of that clearing corporation, who can't,
right,
then you just have more power within that oligopoly.
And Arthur Levitt wrote on this in his op-ed piece, I think it was in the Journal 10 days ago. So, I mean, the major Wall Street firms, they've got a double-edged sword here. They love the spread. They love to play with that. But at the same time, they also want to keep score of who gets to play. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So you could at least define who gets to play, and so long as you can keep OTC instruments in place, then the ability to price differentially above fair value, the ability to extract higher spreads when people come back to you to trade, the ability to see the flows as people trade with you all stay intact, and that's how the money's made in the derivative markets.
We welcome all of you on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio. With us, Rick Bookstaber, for years in the derivatives business, Bridgewater Associates, Quantitative Equity Fund, at Front Point Partners, among many others. And was it Morgan Stanley? I think the ice was just pulling back from Vermont and New Hampshire when Brad Hintz and Rick Bookstaber were working at Morgan Stanley. It was a few years ago. We'll leave it at that.
Well, as the Obama administration legislative agenda was taking shape, some of the think tanks in Washington were telling us that of everything the administration is trying to do, healthcare reform and all that financial regulation and reshaping financial regulation was the least likely to succeed. Does it still look that way?
I'm not on the inside of what's going on, but, I do get concerned for two reasons. One is the distraction due to health care. And the second is people have very short memories. And I can envision, towards the end of 2009 or early 2010, people are looking back and saying, gee, what was that happened back in fall of 2008? There won't be the urgency anymore to address some of these issues. So the longer we wait, the less likely there'll be new regulation because people will just get back to, the status quo.
Should there be?
Should there be new regulation? Yes. Again, getting back to the points I made in my book, I didn't really specifically say in my book that we would have a subprime meltdown that would propagate out to the mortgage markets and so on and so forth. But the thing that I did say was, insofar as you have high leverage and complexity, you inevitably are going to go from one market crisis to the other. So if we don't reduce complexity in the financial markets, and if we don't reduce leverage, then in some form or other, we're going to have a replay of what just has happened over the last few years, what happened 11 or 12 years ago with LTCM. So we do have to get some type of regulation to control these two demons.
Say, Rick, if we have a clearing operation, aren't we just replacing the netting systems that already exist? And doesn't that mean that the clearing operation has to be a monopoly, move all over-the-counter derivatives into it? Otherwise, I've just taken something that nets everything, law of large numbers, and I've split it up. I really haven't reduced systemic risk, haven't I?
I think that the advantage of the clearing corporation, one advantage anyway, is it increases transparency so that a regulator at least can go to one place and see in aggregate what the positions are. Take Lehman as an example. Somebody could, assuming, that everything were done in the clearing corporation in a way that were readily observable, somebody could go and say, what are the exposures that Lehman has, rather than having piles and piles of documents that they have to leaf through. But it doesn't really, it doesn't address the overall issues.
Go ahead, Ken. You take us out to the news.
Some of the news you need to know from around the world this morning. NASA has put off to this morning's launch of the Space Shuttle Discovery. That's because of bad weather in Florida. South Korea, meanwhile, has sent its first rocket into orbit. Swine flu may infect as much as half the population in the U.S. That's according to the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. Bloomberg's John Bascom will have more in a few minutes. And, of course, President Obama to name Ben Bernanke to another term as Federal Reserve Chairman. That'll happen on Martha's Vineyard. We'll have it live for you coming up at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, 9 o'clock hour as well. Brad Hintz, optimistic for the market. He's personally moved futures here since he's walked into the studio. We're up 2 now, up 6.30 on the S&P futures. A little August excitement here. Dow futures up 52. We'll have much more. Rick Bookstaber with us, Brad Hintz with us on television and radio. It's Bloomberg Surveillance. Trump Park Stamford. Why rent when you can afford to own? Visit TrumpParkStamford.com for details. Our guest hosts, Brad Hintz of Sanford Bernstein and Rick Bookstaber with us as well. On quantitative finance, you were at MIT. You took your PhD there. Is the land of Steve Ross forever changed? Is the land of financial engineering, quantitative finance, is it forever changed? And how will it amend 2, 3, 4 years out?
There's two assaults that have occurred in terms of financial engineering and quantitative finance. The first occurred in August of 2007, when you had a meltdown of a lot of the quantitative hedge funds, AQR, Global Alpha of Goldman Sachs, and essentially that area got too crowded. So what happens is you get a consolidation. People will move out of that area, it'll be rebuilt, and 3 or 4 years from now, with slightly different tools, you're going to see quantitative hedge funds back to where they were 3 or 4 years ago, hopefully a little smarter and knowing when there's a lot of other people chasing the same strategies. In terms of financial engineering, and I almost want to put that in quotes because usually when you do engineering, it improves the structure of the industry that you're engineering. With financial engineering.
It's a rumor.
Yeah. I think it remains to be seen whether we move back to these sophisticated one-off products that are opaque, that obfuscate what's going on, or whether we move more and more towards standardization, which would reduce the need for a lot of Russian physics PhDs.
One of the things we've all learned is the linkage between credit default swaps and the equity market. And we've seen how credit default swaps could be used for speculating in the equity market. With margins going up to 30% in these new clearing operations, will that continue? Will the credit default swap market be as profitable going forward?
I think, with the credit default swap market, there's a valuable function that it serves, and for that function, I don't see why higher margins will affect it. That function being, I'm somebody who has an exposure to corporate bond. It's not a very liquid instrument. I don't want to sell it, but I want to hedge it. But that ends up being a very small percentage of what's been going on with the credit default swap market. Most of what's been going on with the credit default swap market has been more akin to side bets on the market. And there you may see a reduction. But I think that'd be healthy overall for the market because, as you're pointing out, that becomes the tail that wags the dog because the credit default swap market can end up having a secondary effect on the equity market when it's being applied as a speculative tool.
So that means it shrinks back to fixed income primarily?
I hope so. It'd be nice to have it do what its economic function is, as opposed to being used primarily as a speculative tool, and actually, in some cases, possibly as a manipulative tool.
You want to squeeze something here, Ken?
Well, everything is in such flux now. When's the earliest you can see, risk aversion taking a back seat and things getting back to quote, normal?
I think we're starting to see it.
Starting to see it now.
And, it's the nature of the way our minds work. We forget the past fairly quickly, and we take a little risk. So far, so good. Take a little more risk. So far, so good. And the type of risks that lead to these crises are not risks that are observed every day. So you could go 1, 2, 3 years out, adding a little more risk without a major issue. So absent some type of regulation that helps prevent this cycle from recurring, I think we're already starting to see, based on sort of the increased VAR of Goldman Sachs and the inevitable result that you're going to see of others following suit, an increase in risk-taking activity. And what will happen is people will say, oh, this time it's different. This time we've got to figure it out until the next crisis occurs.
Rick Bookstaber, thank you so much. Here's the book, folks. A Demon of Our Own Design, Markets, Hedge Funds, and the Perils of Financial